Welcome in. We're glad you're with us again on this Thursday. And guess what? It's starting to cool down. So I'm excited about that. We're starting to get into a little bit of the weather feel. So enjoying that. A few announcements. First off, remember please to like and share. This is a way for other men to know what is going on a Thursday morning or a Thursday evening by clicking the like button and then also clicking the share button. And a lot of you have been doing that. We appreciate it. And we've had some great guys that have connected with us because you have clicked that button. So we encourage you to continue to do that. Also, make sure you're following us on our men's app. This is the way that we are communicating, since this is the only form that we really have to communicate with you guys. Make sure you're downloading the men's app. If you're new with us, welcome. And this is a great way for you to stay in touch with us, is to download CS Men. It's on the Android, also on the iPhone, and it's just a way for us to communicate some of the events that we will have coming up. Last one is this, and this is the most exciting one. We are going to be live October the 1st. October the 1st, we will be live in the morning time, live in the evening time. We are not, at first I said we were, but we are not going to do a dinner. But instead, what I'm going to do is for everybody that shows up, we're going to give them a free t-shirt. So we're working with that right now. The series is called God Used Flawed Men to Change the World. And so we're going to go through men in the Old Testament who were definitely flawed, that God used. And if he can use flawed men in the Bible, he can use you and I as well. And so it's going to be a great series that we're going to kick off on October the 1st. Now, we're continuing our series on parables, and we have a fun one for you this morning or this evening. And none other than Eric, our executive pastor over our financial department, is here to share with us. So click the like button, do the yays and all that while he comes up and shares.
All right. Thank you, Brent. So excited to be back with you guys again today, and I'm even more excited about the announcement that Brent had, because I am talking to a camera right now in a room not full of you all, and I hate that. So I am super excited, I'm sure all of our other teachers are as well, that we get the chance to stand in front of you guys coming soon, and we won't have to do this via camera. So today, super excited, super pumped to talk to you about what we get to talk about today, continuing our parables study. And so like a lot of you guys, I'm sure that during this downtime that we've had, this pandemic, the quarantine, the home time, you found yourself with a lot of maybe different hobbies, different things that you did with your family, and our family was no different. So one of the things in our family that we started to do a lot as we sat around was play games. And so I don't know if you guys are gamers and that's a game thing in your family and you just like to play games, but we found ourselves playing games. I got 3 kids, they're all college aged, and we found ourselves learning different and new exciting games. Our kids taught us this card game called Hand and Foot. I don't know if many of you are familiar with that, but what I can tell you is it created some very unchristian-like behavior in the Waite household. So if you see my wife, she works at the info desk, please stop by and give her a hard time about that and ask her how she reacted during some of our games of Hand and Foot. But an interesting thing did happen through some of the games. We started playing this game called Spinner. And it's a domino style game where you get a handful of dominoes in front of you, you're kind of building and playing off the other people's dominoes. And the idea is that you're supposed to go out. You start with 7 pieces and the person that gets down to none is the winner. But what's fun to watch at this time is my kids. And my son, who's the youngest, he's got 2 older sisters, who are real competitive, real gaming, and he was the youngest, kind of the go with the flow kind of guy, kind of just did his thing. All of a sudden, as we started to play this game, he was winning game after game after game after game, and I was like, wow, he's pretty good. And of course, it's like most games, where you sort of have some luck involved in the dominoes you draw, but there's a fair amount of strategy that goes with it. And after he kept winning, I finally asked him, and I was like, dude, why are you so good at this game? It's kind of weird, like you normally don't care about games. And he said, well, Dad, it's kind of easy. I just watch the moves that you make. I know what piece I have that I'm gonna play last. And so I follow your moves and I can watch and count who's gonna go out first by seeing the moves, and I know how to get ahead of them and be the first one out. So it was pretty fun to watch and see how he's able to employ strategy by seeing the end in mind and working back. And that's what we get to talk about today in today's parable, is we get to see Jesus unpack a story that keeps the end in mind. It puts us in a place where Wouldn't it be great if life always worked that way? That we knew what the end was at first, and as we worked our way backwards, so decisions that we would make, jobs, finances, relationships, schooling, all these things that we have to do, that we would be in a place that we would say, gosh, if I knew how the end was gonna play out, I probably would have done things a little bit differently along the way. So in today's parable, we're gonna get to see that. So if you like stories like that, you're gonna really like this. So I'm gonna jump in and read today's lesson. But before we do, I want you to know we're studying parables again, and the parables are Jesus' way of using a fictional story to tell a biblical truth. And so this is no different. A fictional story is gonna be told today about a biblical truth. What's interesting about the parable that I get to teach on today is it is one of the most debated by theologians for years about the true interpretation of it, about what Jesus was really teaching in this. So, Brent picked the business guy to teach on this one, who didn't go to Bible college. So I just want you to all know I'm gonna set the bar really low, so if this goes horribly bad, we're gonna blame Brent. But let's dive in today and see what God has to say. So if you'll jump into your Bibles, your apps, whatever you wanna see, we're gonna start in Luke, in the book of Luke, chapter 16. I'm gonna start in verse 1. If you don't wanna turn to anything, I'm gonna read it anyway, so you can just follow along. So this is the parable of the shrewd manager, and it starts like this. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and he asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. Dun, dun, dun. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he's got a plan. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, make it 450. 50% off sale just today. That's not in the text. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For this people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little also will be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. So guys, what we have here is this manager who has not done a good job. I don't know if any of you have ever been fired from a job, and hopefully this isn't bringing up any bad memories if you have been, but this guy has not been doing a good job. He knows he's gonna be fired. He's basically been found out. The manager's calling him in to say, hey, what have you done? So he decides in his moment of need to actually try to do something to set up his next. He's panicking. I mean, as we all would, knowing that our job's gonna be gone, and he identifies he has no discernible skill set to do anything in the world, and he's got a pride issue that he doesn't want to become a beggar, so he decides to go out and start negotiating debts. What's funny, he's negotiating debts that aren't even his. So he's real sneaky. So he's been dishonest as a bookkeeper to start off with. He now knows he's getting fired, so now he goes out and starts doing even more dishonest things and slashing the debts that are owed to his manager. And so Jesus comes along and in the story says, well, the manager comes back and says, hey, I know it's dishonest what you did, but that's awfully smart. You're pretty darn smart in what you did. And so it's pretty interesting to see that he gets commended for being shrewd, but not being dishonest. So Jesus isn't saying that we should go out and be dishonest. That's not what he's saying. What they're recognizing is the shrewdness of the man in dealing with his own people. And isn't that true in a lot of things? Isn't it true that sometimes we learn the best things from the bad examples in life? I can tell you that just being in the church world and things that, there from time to time we'll have to deal with marriage situations and do some marriage counseling. And I can tell you that sitting down with couples and seeing the destruction that's happened and the behaviors that happen have left me walking away going, I'm not gonna do that ever. Boy, I sure don't wanna find myself in that place by these examples. And that's simply what Jesus is doing in this. He's using a bad example to illustrate something great. And what's interesting is if you'll just notice in verse 8, where it talks about this man acting shrewdly, and then it says, for the people of this world are more shrewd. So I want you to underline that. The people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. And what Jesus is pointing out here is saying the non-believers, the people of the world, actually do a better job at figuring out how to deal with each other than those that are Christians. And sometimes I find that true, that sometimes as Christians, we're just not good at negotiating a deal. We're not good at a contract. We're not good at being shrewd. We think it's somehow dishonest or deceitful. And we've missed the boat on those types of things are actually okay. So what Jesus is illustrating that, God wants us to understand how to be strategic with what we have and knowing how to do it. And so after we see up through verse 8, Jesus now twists and goes to the teaching part of the Bible. And he's gonna give us, as I read this, 4 main points that I wanna cover with you guys that he instructs us on what to do and how to be shrewd in dealing with this. So I'm gonna start off in verse 9. The first thing that he says is, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself. So what I'm asking you in this is we need to use our wealth to invest in people, not possessions. It says, use your worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves. So the shrewd manager knew this. He didn't have a skill set. The only thing he had left at this moment was some time and his intellect and his network. So he had a network of people. So he took it upon himself to say, what can I do in this limited amount of time with the network that I have? He already knew he was getting fired. So maybe it was his last day and the guy's like, hey, before you clean out your desk, go out and see my accounts and call on them. So what he knew was, I don't have a lot of time left, but what I have is relationships with these people, so let me figure out a way to set up what I can do with what I have left. He does know that he still has the ability to have some influence in his final hours. And so the other part that this is pointing out is that, guys, what we have in this world is temporary. Our possessions are only going to be temporary, but the people we have in our lives are not temporary. And so sometimes we tend to focus too much on stuff and not on the people and relationships in our life. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at here, is he's wanting to show us, hey, you need to spend some time focusing on the people. You need to be investing. And so what does that look like for you? Your worldly wealth. How are you using what you've been given, the treasures you have? Are you using those to leverage relationships with people, or are you just lining things up behind you? Are you just saying, hey, the next car, the next vacation home, the next boat, the next ATV, the next hobby, the next 401k I can have, you know what I mean? Are you looking at the wealth that you've been given to say, how am I leveraging this for the kingdom with people? So continuing on, further in verse 9, then it says, to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So Jesus is saying, our goal is to not just get to heaven, but our goal is to get there with a crowd of people. Our goal is to get there not alone. And sometimes I think, in Christianity worlds, when we talk to people about coming to faith and we say, okay, you said the prayer, now you're in the club and all's right with you and God. Not so. You do realize that when you get to heaven, you're going to want to have a crowd there saying, hey, thanks to what you did and thanks to the relationships you've had, we've been waiting for you. We're ready to have you with us. Sometimes I get asked these questions, and I've posed some questions to people sometime, and I'm going to hit you guys with this one. How many of you right now would consider yourselves in full-time ministry? Sure, not very many hands go up. You look at me and you say, Eric, that's you. But I want you to know you're actually all in full-time ministry. When you became a Christian, you are in ministry. You actually are the shrewd manager. You have the opportunity to have a network and create influence with the resources you've been given. And what I can tell you guys is, honestly, your job's a whole lot harder than mine. I work in ministry. I get to read a book that was already written, and I get to tell stories about it, and I get to share truth from you in a book that was already written. For you guys, you got to go into the workplace. You got to be on the construction site. You got to be at Honeywell. You got to be at Intel. You got to be in the garage. You got to be around those people. And your call to ministry is quite a bit different than mine. But Jesus was giving directions to help us. He's asking us to be strategic with what we have and the resources that we have, so that when we get to heaven, you want that welcoming committee. And so you might think, gosh, Eric, it's the first time I've ever heard that. It's the first time I've ever thought about being in full-time ministry. And gosh, if we know that we're going to be called to account at heaven as to what we did with our time, talent, and treasures in this world, oh gosh, I might be the shrewd manager. I may be getting fired today. But no, that's not the case. I want to encourage you and let you know there's still time. There's an urgency to it, but you still have time to think about that. Next, continuing on, Jesus continues to speak, and we'll jump down to verse 10. And he says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? So sometimes, we've got to answer the question that if God can't trust us with what we have now, we shouldn't expect more. Don't expect more. I love when I hear people talk about, their giving or their activities with the church or how they're managing their wealth. And it's funny when I hear people say, I got this big deal coming, and if I close this deal, Eric, you just have no idea how much I'm going to bless the church. Or even people that go so far as saying, I play the lottery, and when I buy those tickets, if I won the lottery, can you imagine what I could do for the church? Well, let me tell you, there's a couple reasons you don't win the lottery. One, maybe you don't play. And two, just pointing back to this saying, how have you done with what you've been given so far? So this doesn't become a conversation of what I have or what I don't have. And when people say, well, I just don't have enough, and if I had a little bit more, I'd bless out of my excess, but I've got to meet mine first. And that's not what it's saying. In terms of the world, we're pretty wealthy here. We pretty much have wealthy possessions that we can manage. So think about it in your own life. If you saw someone that wasn't managing something very well, would you be inclined to give them more? And that's what Jesus is getting at here. It's what he's teaching us is that, hey, if you're not able to handle what you currently have, winning the lottery probably isn't a resource issue. It's a management issue. It's a how are you doing? You want to pray for added riches, you should pray for added wisdom to come with those riches so that we know how to manage it well when that happens. For me, it's why I auto give my tithe. I have an automatic system where it comes out and gets given to the church so that I know that in those moments that Tina and I might find ourselves praying about something financial, I can, for the most part, say, I'm managing my finances the way God wanted me to. Am I doing what he's asked me to do so that if there's a blessing to come in my life for something more, I don't have to sit there and say, I screwed up with what you gave me first. So you've told me that why would I give you more if you can't handle what you have now? So for me, if I can set up my tithing in an auto fashion, then at least I know that's done. I don't even see the money. I don't even get a chance to manage it. It just leaves right away. What sits in my account is what I'm left with. And I've learned after, learning how to do this and live my life this way that, boy, the 90% that I have left to live on goes a whole lot further than the 100% I used to try to figure out on my own. So simply setting God first with my finances has allowed me to figure out how to manage the other 90. And so what I have isn't the blessing, but what I do have with what I do with the blessing, or what I do with the resource is the blessing. And there's a huge difference between those two things. What I have is not the blessing. What I do with it is the blessing. And so sometimes having more potentially could be the biggest curse that ever comes to us because we haven't learned how to manage the little. And you can see people that, can mess this up from time to time. So the last part that he covers in this, and the last part that I want to go over with you guys is starting in verse 13. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And then the last little part he adds in here. The Pharisees who love money heard all this and were sneering. He said to them, "You're the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight." So I feel like Jesus was sitting there making the, drop the mic point at this thing and saying, hey, you guys cannot serve both God and money because God knows your heart. And then as he's delivering this speech, you can just see that the Pharisees were sitting over off to the side, and they're the religious hyperdogs of the day, the guys that would follow the law, and they were the tithers to the penny and knew what they gave. But God knew that their hearts were sideways about it. And so this is just the end of this, I think, is great. He just takes a pot shot at them and he's like, hey, you guys over there in that crowd, God already knows your hearts and he knows that you don't manage this very well. But what happens in this is what God's asking us to do right here is to have a change of mind. We have to switch our mindset from being owners to being managers. And you've heard us talk about it before in the Bible, and Bible teachers will use the stewardship word, and that's what it is. Being a good steward is being a manager of what God has given us, and that's what they're getting at. And it's really tough. I mean, the world is constantly telling us this: me, mine, myself, gotta have, get mine. My talents got me there. But the big contrast is that God's telling us there's a completely different way of doing that. God's mind is to tell us, I'm trusting you with what I've given you. How are you doing with that? How are you doing with that? And I love the part, one of my favorite passages in the Bible is you cannot serve both God and money. I think it's funny that he used God and money. Jesus could have said a lot of things there. You cannot serve both God and your fame, your job, your family, your possessions, your hobbies. He could have said a lot of things. But they wrote, and Jesus said at this time, money. Because God knew where his biggest competition was going to lie for our hearts. And it was money. He knew that's where it was going to be. And boy, in America, it's really tough for us, guys. We value money and wealth and possessions probably more so than most anybody else in the world. So it's pretty tough. God, in the end, he wants our hearts, and he wants us to be in heaven with them. So sometimes we just mess that up. We get in the way of ourselves, and we forget. And we let the world teach us, and the world lead us in a way towards this, owning versus managing concept. We have to remember, this mine word, and sometimes we want to sit there and say, this life is mine. The purpose is for me to decide. But really, God's asking us, how can I use this life for others? And so, guys, I just hope that, and my prayer for all of us is that we understand that, you gave me this, the gifts and talents that I have, the treasures that I have. I am in full-time ministry, no matter what my paycheck says. Once I became a Christian, I'm in full-time ministry, and I need to steward and manage and honor with what I have. And I can just tell you guys, it's tough. This is tough to talk about. It's tough to hear my own words say this. It's a tough place to be, to listen to these words. I wrestle with it like you do. Sometimes I wish it didn't say this, but it does say this, and we know that this is truth. So sometimes, there's people that maybe find themselves really wrestling with this, and I often would just ask them, if you realize that you're in a place where I'm putting money before God and my possessions before God, I simply ask you, how's that going for you? How's that working out? Because I think at some point you're going to have to answer a pretty tough question, or it may not work out the way that you want it to, because those things are going to fade. You're not going to take them with you. I love one of our pastor friends. He's got a church up here in Scottsdale, and he has this quote, and I found it as I was studying for this. Is Mark Driscoll's his name, and he says, "Wealth is a wonderful tool, but it's a horrible god." And I love that. I mean, we need to think of money. Money's nothing more than a tool. It's something that's helping us get there. But when we decide to place that in the God complex, boy, it sure messes up. I sometimes think, as I was recently talking with a friend of mine, and we were talking about this eternal concept and keeping eternity in mind. And this is a lot of what this parable's about, is looking at a bad example of a guy, who had a good outcome, a good lesson that we can learn from this. And it just reminded me, we were sitting, chatting, talking, and we were thinking about people in our lives. And you ever just have those people in your life that you look at and you just feel like, man, they've just calmness about them. There's just a peace about them. Like, things don't seem to rattle them. They seem to just peaceably go about their life and have things. I can name about 7 or 8 people in my life that I think of like that. And I find myself always going, boy, when I get older, I want to be just like X, fill in the blank. Well, guys, my hope and prayer for you is that you have people like that in your life, that you have people that you can look to, that you can say, there's something really different about that. And oftentimes, as I've gotten to know these people a little bit more, and the people that I admire and look up to, they tend to have this thing figured out, this eternal perspective figured out. And they're able to prioritize their life, and they're able to strategize and understand what they've been given and how best to manage it. And so, the parable was designed for us to see the end and kind of work backwards. It's designed to see those, like I think back to my son playing that, the game pieces that are in front of us. So we can look at our lives right now and see the game pieces that are in front of us. But guys, if we've got a glimpse at the back and in a lesson like this, we can see the end. We can see what God's asking us to do in the end. Boy, it gives us a great chance to look back at the pieces that we have sitting in front of us and go, probably need to be a little bit more strategic about how I'm dealing with the pieces that are in front of me. It's never too late. But there's an urgency. The shrewd manager, that's the one thing he had left in his world was, I don't know why, but the story doesn't say when the guy walked in and said, "You were mismanaging my books, pack up your stuff and get out now." He gave him some time. I don't know why, but he gave him an opportunity to go back and do this and do the on sale and create relationships. And, he said it's going to create a place that people will welcome me into their homes. So for us in our lives, we can take from that and say, the gifts that I have in front of me right now, the treasures and wealth and possessions that I have, it's not too late, but I better be urgent about it because it is going to go away someday. We're all going to get fired from this life. And so we want to be in heaven. We want a welcoming committee with us. And so sometimes seeing these bad examples teaches us a really great way of doing this. And so let's see if we can focus on how to do what's next. So let me close this in prayer. We've got some study questions for you guys. I'll let you guys jump into the room. Guys, thanks for this. Thanks for the teaching. Thanks for showing me that it's different in how we manage this. It goes against me, myself, my wishes, my desires. But God, thanks for showing me that there's a place that I can invest in. And it's those relationships. It's in ministry. It's in how I'm handling and dealing with people. Where's my wealth going? How am I using that for the kingdom? I can tell you guys and be thankful for the giving that does come into this church and the opportunity that we as a church get to steward it. And God, I'm just thankful for the giving that comes in, because right now, because of the giving that comes in, next week there's going to be a first grader that shows up that's going to be in heaven. And that's a direct result of someone understanding with the end in mind and knowing that adding another boat or another ATV or another hobby to their lives is not the best thing they can do with their money, but putting it in a place that invests in lives and puts more people in heaven. Because how cool is it going to be in heaven when we can get there and that first grader is going to go, you know what? You're part of my story. You're part of why I'm here in heaven celebrating with you. Because of your giving, I attended a place called Cornerstone and I was able to hear about Jesus. So guys, thanks for today. God, thanks for the message. Thanks for using these words to instruct us, to get us better, to help us. God, and just thanks. Bless our time as we go into the discussion group. And just thanks for all you do for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Go for it.